Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. We have some breaking news coming in from the Middle East, out of the United States, and also out of Russia. You don't want to miss today's show. I'm telling you what. Hold on a minute. We're about to get there right now. When I ain't gonna mess around tonight. But we have strikes imminent going on in Iran. Blockade is definitely staying up. I don't know what news broadcasts are talking about, where they're saying that they're going to be pushing away from the Iran deal, but it don't seem like that at all, with all the air traffic and cargo that's going to, well, and all the assets that we have in the region. And we have further updates that's going on in Russia and Ukraine also. Also, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to drop a like and drop a subscription. And hit that bell button so you get notified whenever we come on air. We're going to be on air between 3:30 and 4:30 in the evening for our evening news, and then between 10 and 11 o'clock for our night news. Should be daily, but we might have days where we might have to skip a day, but we're going to try to keep y'all up to date as much as we can. But further ado, let's get started.
From the sources about possible short but high-intensity strikes appears to be highly likely at this moment, as we have seen that the USS George H.W. Bush and the USS Abraham Lincoln are still on scene inside of CENTCOM's area of responsibility, along with the USS Tripoli and its amphibious ready group carrying the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, and also the USS Boxer is still on the way, with the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit being carried on board as well. We also know that there are at least 2 brigade combat teams of the 82nd Airborne Division that are currently within the CENTCOM area of responsibility as well, giving us an idea that right now an amphibious landing force could be anywhere around 12,000 to 15,000 strong at our most conservative estimates. We also understand that the amount of available combat firepower in U.S. Air Forces and Naval Air Armed Forces that are currently within the area is still incredibly high, and is suggesting that at any moment a resumption of strikes could continue against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The fact that U.S. forces are growing in size and strength within the area instead of decreasing in size and volume is once again suggesting to us that a resumption of armed actions could continue, and any sorts of statements that the United States might just sit idly by and allow for the U.S. and Western economies to be devastated and racked by significant economic recessions due to the lack of the oil flowing out of the Middle East largely appears to be quite unwise from a strategic perspective, and would also be akin to a very quick political death in the United States of America, considering the upcoming midterms and the significant pressure that this will be putting on the U.S. public, which will be directly seeing these prices at the pump and also reflected in the prices of all other consumer goods elsewhere throughout the country. Meaning that there would be significant pressure at this moment to see that the United States somehow, some way, tries to reopen the strait and at least see that the economic difficulties will be decreased instead of greatly exacerbated and exponentially increasing with the months leading up to the midterms, which could be detrimental, at least depending on how it goes. We also do understand that at this moment right now, the United States is considering the deployment of the long-range hypersonic weapons system, the first hypersonic missile delivery vehicle that exists within the U.S. Army, and we do understand that one of these batteries has been deployed in Germany as a part of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, but we also now understand that one of them that's currently here in the United States, may be diverted into the Middle East to prepare for eventual strikes against Iran. If approved, it will mark the first time that the U.S. will have operationally deployed its first new hypersonic missile system, and once again, I do need to make the caveat here, there is one that currently is in Germany, but that is technically not an operational deployment because it's not engaged in any warlike activities. This one will be the first one that's engaged into a battlefield for the larger part, and would be used against enemy forces, which would be the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're not entirely sure if it's going to be sent right now. That's apparently a significant consideration, and we'll have to see whether or not that ends up being followed through on. We've also been able to hear that in additional news, while there was 3 deployed aircraft carriers within CENTCOM's area of responsibility, this number will be decreasing to 2, as the Washington Post has confirmed, according to U.S. officials, that the USS Gerald R. Ford, which has been on the longest carrier deployment since 1964, will depart the Middle East and begin the sail for home home in the coming days, meaning that the USS Gerald R. Ford will now be departing the area of responsibility and the theater and will be returning back to the United States, most likely to the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia, to be able to see that refits and repairs to vital systems can be conducted, and to also see that the crew, which has been on ship for almost a year at this point, will be able to return to the United States of America and once again reunite with their families and loved ones and have a little while of shore leave before they have to return back to their duties on board the carrier or seriously consider whether they're going to re-enlist. Outside of that, however, it does appear that the United States, regardless of the removal of the Ford from the theater, is still keeping a significant presence of firepower that could be leveraged against the Iranians at any point in time, and are even considering adding in new weapon systems like the LRHW, which could also be used to great effect against the Islamic Republic of Iran in the resumption of war. A lot of people are talking about this very issue right now, and we do have to keep in mind, folks, that the domestic situation economically here in the United States and around most of the world, it's not looking that positive, at least at the moment. This entire conversation as to whether a war is going to begin or whether we're going to sit on top of the blockade is coming in the midst of the rising oil prices that we've seen today, which appear to have finally unshackled themselves from the diplomatic goodwill statements that are made every Monday and are now starting to wildly skyrocket out of control. It's in fact the fastest that we've ever seen. Some people who keep a track of this as their job have stated that the algorithms for their systems that are tracking this price increase don't even have an ability at this point to be able to measure a price increase by percentage at this level every day, and they're in fact having to try and quickly rewire their programming within their algorithms to be able to sort this information properly and show it.
Yeah. Also, that's for the gasoline prices, by the way. The thing you're mentioning but right there, that's for one of those applications that tracks the gas prices within the 50 states here in the United States. And apparently, the gas price was going up so fast in a single day that their program literally couldn't update fast enough to keep the price current, which is insane.
It is pretty insane. I don't think anyone can really have any ifs, ands, or buts about that. Yesterday, when we looked at the national average for domestic gasoline prices, the price was hovering around $4.16 a gallon. Today, the price is now $4.23 a gallon, meaning that we've seen about a 7-cent jump in the average price per gallon nationwide in the span of 24 hours, which is not that great to see. That means that if this kept up at that same rate, we may see that within about 10 days from now, the price of gas will have risen to about $5 a gallon if this continues at this current rate, which we've seen over just the past 24 hours. We do understand that the West Coast is being the most heavily affected, along with the periphery inside of the Northeast, but a larger amount of the western states here within the plains are generally not that heavily affected, as they're not directly reliant on the direct shipments of fuel like some other areas are, and these are generally closer to the major refinery lands that are seen around Louisiana and Texas, which means they're also a little bit further insulated from any sort of rapid increases or jumps in price, unlike the peripheries of the United States of America that are not close to the major heartlands of the oil refineries down in Louisiana and Texas. We also understand that the price of oil in the international markets is also beginning to rise rapidly as well. Today, Brent crude skyrocketed by 8%, hitting about $120 per barrel. To quickly show you all the direct prices that we're seeing at the moment, Brent crude is still around $120 per barrel. And right now, as the trading closed today, the price is now hovering around $119.83. This is a significant jump in price over the course of a single day, and is about a 9% jump from where it started trading in the early hours of the morning. We also understand that the prices for WTI crude, or West Texas, the I stands for something else, oil prices, are currently hovering around $107.16 as well, reaching a peak today of $109. This is once again, mind you all, in the middle of the week, and right now the United States government is making a significant amount of claims, much like they've made in the midst of the weekdays every other week so far, that things are going good and it looks like there might be a peace with Iran here soon. It appears that those statements are no longer able to calm the oil trading markets, much like they were in the past, as the oil trading markets now appear to be directly correlating their prices to the available oil in the world, instead of it being the diplomatic statements that sound really good about the whole situation, which we'd expected that this would have happened at some point here in the near future, and we could expect that at this point, these sorts of rising prices could happen day over day, regardless of the statements and regardless of the news that comes out, because no matter how good the words words that are said, it's not directly affecting how much oil is available in an oil tank somewhere in the United States or elsewhere in the world to be able to buy, refine, and then sell to the public for them to be able to use. And a lot of people currently are talking about this kind of significant pressure that's being seen on the domestic gas prices and also on the global oil prices in Brent and
Now, the prices that you see that is spiking like that is because the stock market is, well, is going crazy because they don't know what to think really, and where to go with the oil prices because of the strait being blocked. I mean, Iran's about to have an even bigger issue because the oil refineries are getting full and they don't have nowhere to put it. I think they have like 2 more, maybe 3 more days left of storage, if that, and then they're going to run into an even more problem because they're going to have to stop pumping oil, or excuse me, drilling oil.
WTI crude, which are some of the most heavily bought and traded oils on the planet. And right now, a lot of people are talking about what's going to be happening soon, with the U.S. considering a possible continuation of the war against Iran and the rising prices here on the home front for gasoline. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this right now, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so today has been a wild day in the oil markets. It's been a wild day in the bond markets, too. And also, we've gotten a lot of news today about the energy situation here in the United States, and it's not looking that great. I think that's not really a shock to most people. I think most people knew that was coming. But we're seeing today that crude oil prices had a massive spike of about 8 to 10% after the U.S. announced they plan to extend the Hormuz blockade indefinitely. So what are your thoughts? 55% said the U.S. will likely attack Iran very soon to get rid of the situation, while 22% said the U.S. will only extend the blockade, and 17% said U.S. forces will likely do both of these very, very soon. And I would say this. I would say that I think the U.S. will attack Iran soon. We've been seeing a lot of messaging come out today that the U.S. might be planning to attack, and they kind of really don't have a choice, because once the oil price starts going out of control like this, and then the political antics can't get it under control either with these hope.
See, the funny thing is that you have other news agencies. My cat right there. Other news agencies saying that the United States is going to withdraw. It's nonsense. The bullhickey that you hear with, well, fake news. I mean, you can't say it no better than that. That term actually sticks. Fake news. I don't understand where they think that we're going to withdraw from this and just let them keep their uranium and their enrichment. It's not going to happen. Definitely not going to happen. And I hope Congress don't let it happen. And don't be that stupid. We have to finish the job that we started. Period.
Statements about the war coming to an end, which it's not. Plot twist there with that. I would say that an attack is probably the only thing left on the table at this point to actually fix the situation. So I'm with the 55%. I would say they're probably about to attack very soon. That's my guess. Also, by the way, crude oil is not the only thing that had a pretty big rise today. We saw U.S. crude oil have an 8% increase at least. We saw Brent crude have an 8%. We saw European natural gas have a 9%. Heating oil with a 6%, and gasoline with a 6% increase as well. So it's across the board, and it's really disturbing to see. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that this is quite a serious situation. The United States will have to attack the Iranians soon, and hopefully this time around their direct war plans will affect the situation positively and where we're being affected. And I've got to say, folks, I know a lot of people are probably tired of hearing me say this because I'm tired of saying it myself, but hopefully we'll see that if new strikes are conducted soon, they're directed against the Iranian forces that are blockading the Hormuz instead of just bombing Tehran again. We can bomb Tehran 9,000 times over the next 90 years, and that will never break the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. For example, in the Second World War, the British could bomb Berlin or, for example, Dresden about as many times as they would want every single day of the week, but that would do absolutely nothing to help British forces that were landing on Sword Beach to be able to successfully land in Normandy and make a beachhead, if y'all see what I'm saying. The military planning and the actions of the military have to directly correlate to the strategic pressures and issues that we find on the front line, and that means that we would have to see that military actions, when they resume, are directed against the crisis point of the conflict, which is the Strait of Hormuz itself, not some capital in Tehran, not the biggest bridge in the country, or the biggest power plant, or the biggest road, or, the fattest guy in Iran or something. It has to be directed against the thing that will actually fix the situation, which always isn't glorious, and it doesn't catch a headline in the news or on a tweet of saying, it's the biggest thing and we blew it up and it's amazing. It's more so mundane. It's just getting business done, and that's what business in the aspect of war is entirely about. If the United States continues to sit on its blockade of the Iranian blockade, we are not going to be sitting on an economy worth talking about for much longer. We're mostly going to see that our economy and also the global economy will start to see significant recessions and significant damage as a result. And there was an endless amount of statements today from the Fed chair and multiple other economic officials that made it incredibly clear that if this situation does not change, the United States will imminently be entering an economic recession at a minimum, and possibly even an economic depression if the situation worsened much farther than what we're seeing right now.
Also, by the way, I'm not sure if you saw this today or not, but apparently, according to the most recent reports, it looks like the government's currently draining the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve for the most part. The inventory's dropped by 7.1 million barrels, apparently, which is the biggest weekly drain since October 2022, which was back during, I believe that was back during the pandemic. So you can see, there's the chart right here, actually, showing that. You can see it's a very large drainage of the petroleum reserves, which I would imagine this is probably for all those ships that are pulling up to the coast that are trying to get oil from the United States in replacement of the Middle East. It's probably all those ships draining it, would be my guess.
Matthew, what's crazy is I think I said that exactly as what was going to happen when I heard about that conga line of ships coming over here. I said, we don't produce enough oil to just load up stuff for them and then ship it out. We're going to deplete the strategic oil reserve for them to be able to have any oil to load on their ships, meaning we're going to be sucked dry by the European ships coming in for oil over the next several months, and we'll probably run out of oil even in the strategic fuel reserves, which is meant, by the way, folks, for us to be able to carry on economic and military activities in the midst of wartime, and we're going to deplete it when we're not even really in a war where this sort of an action would be necessary.
Yeah, and also it's like, selling this oil out of the petroleum reserve, is that if that's what they're actually doing, which I'm not totally sure if that's the exact reason, but that's my hunch, and also that appears to be your hunch as well. But this is going to hurt our wartime status. That's not going to be good for that, because if we don't have a full reserve and we go into a war, we could have a big problem on our hands, especially the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. That would be a very big problem right there. So, I'm not really sure what the U.S. is thinking, because it's not helping the American people to do this. None of our prices are going down. They're all still going up. Gasoline's still going up. Food prices are going up. Farmers are going bankrupt. Nothing's really changing for us. It might be helping out the oil companies, but not the rest of us.
I would have to say it certainly wouldn't be helping us out all too much. And also, some people are pointing out the giant drop that you can see here at the beginning of 2022, which we obviously have to point out is the beginning of the Ukraine war. And during that time, there was a significant amount of sanctions that were leveraged by the United States and the Europeans, in particular, against the Russian Federation, which had a very similar effect to the Middle East situation right now, into where a lot of European states had to divert their oil purchases, which were primarily coming from Russia at that point, to the Middle East and also here to the United States of America and other countries around the world to be able to try and stabilize the economy after they literally chopped off their major oil exporter that they were buying from. So as a result of that, a huge amount of European ships back then, just like we're seeing right now, started to come to the United States of America. That situation was one that was necessary, as of course allowing the Russian Federation to act in belligerence against Western interest and to also continue to purchase oil from them in massive quantities, especially from Europe, would be strategically unwise in the long run. However, this also meant that at that time there was a significant outflow and a humongous spike in oil prices that happened during that time until the oil markets were able to stabilize. The oil markets did eventually stabilize, and we started to slowly rebuild our strategic oil reserve, but we're now seeing that due to the strategic blunder that's occurred within the Strait of Hormuz, in which none of the oil that the Europeans now solely rely on for the larger part can get out to them to buy, all of those European ships, much like they did in 2022, are coming back to the United States of America to get their oil again. And if we're going off of prior trends of how bad it was in the war in Ukraine, or at least the start of the war of Ukraine, when they came over and started to bleed us dry for the larger part for oil to keep their economy running, this time around, this could actually completely deplete the strategic oil reserve. At the highest before the war, it reached nearly it was around 650 million barrels in storage. At the lowest point, at the beginning of 2023, it reached 350 million barrels of storage. That is a depletion of nearly 300 million barrels of oil over the course of about 8 months. With the way that the war has gone in the Middle East so far, and the fact that it would take about 6 months to clear out the minefields inside the Strait of Hormuz, that means that by the time, if we started demining right now, 6 months later, our strategic fuel reserve would basically be non-existent with less than 100 million barrels of oil left inside of it. And that's if we started the best case scenario of military actions today and somehow made the situation safe enough to begin demining within the next several weeks. And that's not really looking to be happening right now because we're still watching the U.S. government waffle at the moment on what they want to do and where they're going to be going with this larger situation that we're watching right now. But obviously, this is not going to be a good situation, and I do have to say that this sort of a thing was an obvious outcome. Many people in the U.S. government stated that this was going to be an amazing thing for European ships to come over and buy U.S. oil. In reality, it's not good for our strategic interest and also our strategic safekeeping of our oil reserves, and it's also not in the best interest of the U.S. citizenry, as the prices are going to be rising to reflect the loss of supply here in the country nationwide like it already is right now.
Yeah, and also, what's really true about the situation right now, and I said this in the video earlier today, if y'all watched that, what the U.S. is doing right now is they're basically playing a big game of dangerous chicken with Iran. They're trying to see which economy is going to collapse first. Is it going to be the Iranian economy that collapses first, or is the entire global economy going to basically come to a screeching halt before Iran comes to a screeching halt? That's basically what they're up to right now, which is a very huge gamble, by the way. That's a massive gamble. We have heard some early reports today that we'll get into here shortly that Iran is feeling the squeeze already from the blockade the U.S. is conducting in the Strait of Hormuz, but it's not enough to cause Iran to collapse yet. It's still going to take months for Iran to actually collapse, if not longer than that possibly. The U.S. has been feeling the pain of it at this point. So at this point, I'm like, what are we going to do? Like, try to take down both economies and see who collapses first? It's like, I'm not sure if we want to do that. We don't want to cause suffering here in America to try to test and see if Iran can survive or not, because China might prop them up in the meantime. So that's probably not a wise move.
Probably not a wise move at all, really, to basically play economic chicken and also look for the equal destruction of both parties. Because at this point, folks, our strategy right now with the Iranians is the Iranians are going to take us down economically, but we're not going to go down without them going down with us. So at this point, they're shoving us off of a cliff economically, and then we're just grabbing onto their shirt while we're falling off the cliff, and we're going to pull them down with us. As far as strategy goes, generally, folks, when I think about fighting a war, I always think about the nation surviving till the end and generally coming out unscathed. I really don't think of grand strategy in a way of we get effed over, but we F them over with us simultaneously. That's usually how you end up losing everything and then end up losing your nation several decades down the road, because every war is fought with this idea of sacrificing the whole nation to beat an enemy, and then you don't even beat them. You just end up both going down the drain simultaneously. So I would say that a much smarter idea would be to take military actions that see that we don't end up coming out of the war as heavily damaged as the Iranians, and then see that the Iranians are the only ones that are on the back foot and are economically and militarily collapsing. Makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe not a lot of a sense to people in Washington. And maybe that's why I ought to try and run for president, because if this is so difficult for them to figure out, I think that anyone could do a better job at this point. We've also been able to hear additionally that at the same time, the price of WTI crude had jumped up about 8.5% today. And we've also been able to hear additionally that gas prices are, of course, rising inside the United States of America. So we've already largely covered those bases, but just to make sure to cover them once again. Moving us on out of that situation, at least within the Strait of Hormuz. We have also been able to hear of some other developments, jumping over to the United States of America, that directly pertain in some situations or some matters to the ongoing situation within the Middle East. We have been able to hear that around $400 million in funds has finally been released by the Pentagon for Ukraine. This was after top Senate officials overseeing defense spending criticized the Pentagon leaders for withholding the money, which they were approached about today, and then it was released not long afterwards. Although it had been held up for some time before, the senators reached out to the Pentagon and asked him what was going on with the funding and why it had not been released. I do have to say that while it's nice to know the $400 million will finally be on the way to Ukraine, $400 million in the terms of fighting a war is a fairly small amount of money. Not an incredibly large amount. This is largely Happy Meals in cost for the Ukrainian armed forces, and nothing that will really be changing the situation for them.
Yeah, and also in the scheme of the war in Iran right now that the U.S. is fighting, this is only half a day's munitions, $400 million. It's barely half a day's munitions when we were fighting the war in the heaviest part of it. So, I mean, that's wild. Also, by the way, I mean, it was bad enough that the U.S. pretty much defunded Ukraine, and they pretty much put it all on Europe to make sure that Ukraine could defend itself for the most part. But also, it's like the $400 million, which is a very small amount of money in the scheme of defense spending. They're also trying to hold that up, too. It's like, that money had already been appropriated. So what the hell are they holding it back for? It's like, you know, I mean, at this point, the vendetta against Ukraine is pretty obvious. I mean, you couldn't get more obvious than what you're seeing here right now. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, and some of the statements that came out from the United States today were quite interesting, to say the least. Also, by the way, to give us a little bit of information about a phone call, which we'll touch on later once we get to the Ukraine war, apparently Putin had told the president in a phone call that he foresees extremely harmful consequences if the U.S. and Israel resort to attacking Iran again. Largely a veiled threat against the United States of America for our continued war against the Iranians. And, of course, we would hope to see that the United States tells the Russians to shove it, and we'll do whatever was within our national interest. If the Russians can't do that on their own, and that's tough luck. Foreign policy isn't fair, and if they're getting their ass beat by the Ukrainians, that's largely on them. We're not here to play fair. Moving us on out of that, we've also been able to hear that some White House officials have stated the following, at least today, to Fox News. The president has met with energy executives frequently to get their feedback on domestic and international energy markets, and they met again yesterday. Secretary Benson was the host of the meeting, and the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, and the Vice President were also there as well. The executives discussed many topics, including domestic production, progress in Venezuela, the red herring, oil futures, natural gas, and shipping. They also discussed how the U.S. is doing better than others. They discussed the steps the president has taken to alleviate global oil markets and steps we could take to continue the current blockade for months if needed and minimize the impact on American consumers, which is a fantasy. And the executives all spoke highly of the actions of the president because, you know, greatest leader on the planet and all that. So it does appear that that was at least the statements that were made on Fox News today by some White House official who was speaking on the matters of how the U.S. is trying to go about dealing with the rising prices of oil that are globally traded and how apparently the president is handling the situation better than anyone ever has in history. We've also been able to hear that in the midst of all this in Washington, some Chinese hackers breached Cuba's embassy in Washington and spied on dozens of diplomats' communications as the island nation faced a U.S. blockade, according to cyber firm Gambit Security, according to reports from Bloomberg. So in the midst of this all, the Chinese just raided the Cuban embassy, basically, in a cyber attack. So we don't know why, but, you know, just a little bit of randomness coming out of this whole thing. You know.
Oh, I tell you what, Cuba's got some stuff I'm sure that China would love to get their hands on. I'm sure, you know, Cuba's got that big defense budget. Cuba's got that big spending. They do all kinds of secret work down there in Cuba.
Man, I bet you.
Wait a minute. Isn't Cuba broke?
Oh no, Matthew, you forgot. They feed their oxen the special kind of supplement that turns them into a battle ox, and they get to ride them into battle, and they're like bulletproof and everything. They're trying to figure out how that works.
You know, but seriously speaking, though, like, you know, that's obviously a joke. Cuba doesn't have anything that anybody would want. I think what the Chinese might be trying to do with this right here is they're trying to see if Cuba is in secret talks with the United States. That's what they're trying to find out, and that's probably why they're allegedly hacking into stuff. They're trying to see if Cuba's having covert talks and trying to basically sell China out, because there's been rumors that they've been talking, the U.S. government in Cuba, and they might be trying to get to the bottom of it.
I think that's probably what the case is. And also they might be trying to figure out what the Cuban government is saying to their embassy in Washington about their condition internally in Cuba, which they might not be that forward with the Chinese. That way they can try and get a better understanding of whether they should back Cuba, or whether they should just let them fall because they would be too weak to stand on their own, even with heavy Chinese support. That also might be another thing that they're trying to figure out, and that's probably why the cyber attack happened today on their embassy, so they can grab a little bit of info and try and figure out what their position is going to be on the Cuban situation, at least at the moment right now. We've also been able to hear that in the midst of this all, there's been some other news that came out of the Middle East today from the Republic of Turkey, as we did get a statement from the president of Erdogan, or the president of Turkey, Erdogan. He said, to those who see themselves in the giant mirror, I just want to say this. Guys, you take up as much space as your dick. Anyways, wait a minute. Hold up. Let me read that again.
Hell?
To those who see themselves as giants in the mirror, I just want to say this. Guys, you only take up as much space as your actual size. Yeah, I swore that it just said something different when I saw that just a second ago before I clicked off of it. Don't you remember that?
Man, I'll tell you what, I saw this earlier today, and apparently, also by the way, apparently the translation got it wrong, just to make it clear. Erdogan was not talking like a sailor and also talking all foul, but apparently this was the original translation. It looks like Grok had a huge blunder today when it translated what Erdogan was trying to say. I read this earlier, and I was like, is this where we're at in the 21st century? This guy's talking about, this. It's like, I don't know what he's talking about here. I thought Erdogan was wilding out.
Oh my god, dude! I remember reading this earlier in the day. I was like, "What the?" I was like, I was tripping so hard, folks, when I read this the first time, because that's actually how it was translated to English. And then apparently, I guess like a tech came in and like auto corrected the translation, because now it says you only take up as much space as your actual size. But I was dying laughing the first time around. I thought, like, apparently, folks, I'm guessing that this is going to go down like that whole Jimmy Carter speech in Poland thing where he said, I'm like carnally in love with the Polish people, I'm here to stay, like kind of a deal where the translation was mixed up. Apparently that was the same thing but with Grok today. So a pretty interesting statement.
Man, I was dissecting that earlier too, because putting aside the language in the translation, I was thinking, what does he mean by this? I was sitting there like visualizing this in my head, and I was thinking, I don't even understand what this would even possibly mean. Like, he's talking about looking in a mirror, take up as much space as right here in the post. Is like, what in the hell? It's like, the Turkish saw that and was probably like, what the hell? They were probably freaking out. They probably contacted X themselves, I'd imagine.
I would bet you they did, man, because that would honestly, man, it's like that is a really bad slip up. Because now instead of everybody talking about what Erdogan actually meant to say, they're all talking about what he didn't say, which is what the translation said. So this probably got the Turkish government pretty irate. And we can of course see that everyone put down the actual first translation in the replies below the tweet, which was then adjusted to actually show the correct translation of the statement. So a pretty wild one out of the day in the Middle East. I mean, that's part of the crazy news that we have for the day. And it was something else, I'd have to say, at the least. I mean, it was something else. But moving us on back into Washington, in the midst of the statements from the president of Turkey and everything else that's been going on today, and all of the developments that we keep hearing about that are being deliberated up in Washington, a lot of people are currently talking about right now what the Congress is about to be doing, as the 60-day War Powers Act deadline is going to be hitting here in the next 2 days, and this Friday. And this means that the Congress will have to vote on authorizing the war on Iran or not authorizing the war. And right now, that's a significant contention in the Congress at this moment, as it does appear that a significant amount of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and the House are all saying that they have apprehensions in one way or another and are fairly unsure as to how they should vote. Some of them are saying that the situation right now is definitely not good for the domestic home front, and maybe voting to not authorize the war will see that the Iranians will just magically lift the blockade and end the pressure domestically on the economy. Others are saying that they might vote to continue the war, and the reasoning behind that is that the United States must take some military action to reopen the strait, otherwise the economic suffering will never cease, regardless if we take military actions or not. And so a lot of people currently are talking about this at the moment. And Matthew, what are people saying about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so we've been asked about this a lot over the last couple of days. There have been people saying, does the timer reset if they have a ceasefire? They've been asking all kinds of questions about the War Powers Act, which is about to be a very big deal starting on this Friday, because on Friday, that is the official 60-day deadline that the Congress either has to authorize war or the president has to withdraw his forces, and he gets a 30-day period once that 60 days is up to get the forces out of the entire region and away from the war zone. So it's coming up on Friday. It's just a couple of days away at this point. So do you think Congress will vote to authorize war on Iran, or what do you think they're going to do? 46% said yes, they will probably vote to authorize war on Iran, while 33% said Congress will probably just fail to act. They probably won't hold a vote probably at all. 13% said no, Congress will force a withdrawal of the troops. So here's the thing. Right now, it sounds like even the allies of the president are having second thoughts about this entire situation. That's what I've heard today from my sources. It sounds like they're getting a little bit with cold feet, it sounds like, about the situation. So what they're asking for is they're asking for transparency from the president. They want the president and his fellows to come down to Congress and explain why the war should continue and what their plan is to get the situation under control. And it sounds like the senators are not getting that information that they really want to make that decision. So they're starting to basically threaten they're going to bring the war to an end unless they get that information. So Friday is the big day. And I personally think that they are going to probably, honestly, they're probably going to fail to act. That's actually what I'm going to say about that. I'm with the 33%. I believe that there's generally some statements being made right now, but whether or not they actually have the strength to stand up and actually use their powers and also exercise their constitutional duty to check and balance the executive branch, I think they're going to get too scared and they're going to chicken out. That's my guess. They probably should demand that the president give some type of information for it, but I sort of doubt they will. But Enforcer, what say you?
I wanted to say that I'm probably going to be with a 46% that the Congress is going to authorize the war. While I can definitely see the arguments that Matthew's making, and a lot of the folks in the 33% who voted for that, I have a feeling that the Congress is most likely going to vote for war, because generally, whenever there is any warlike activities that are being conducted by the United States, the vote almost always goes in the direction of continuing the war in quite a significant margin in any prior conflict or any historical development where the U.S. has been militarily involved in some form of a military campaign, much like the one we're in right now. So for that reason, I would say that they're probably just going to go along and vote to continue the war. But I would also have to say that generally the Congress is quite weak at the moment right now. I have to say, folks, that the state of the affairs of the government is not really a great one. We don't really see that the Congress has a spine to clearly say one thing or another. They're mostly almost like a jelly-like amoeba at this point, and they just kind of get knocked around from place to place, and then you kind of just do nothing. So, you know, I would have to say, I would have to say I don't really know. I'd have a feeling they're either just going to go along with the whole thing and approve it, or they're just going to fail to act like Matthew's saying. But another thing that I do have to point out here, and something that's a little bit important, is that it is a very low chance, much like it's showing in the poll, that they are going to vote against the conflict and force a U.S. withdrawal, because the risk of continuing the war is unknown by them and by all of us, because the current administration is handling it so badly, it could get even worse. But then the threat of ending the war and leaving and then letting the Iranians blockade the strait most likely indefinitely, and then seeing that our economy suffers as a result, and now we can't return and continue the war because of the vote by Congress to withdraw the U.S. forces, puts us in an even worse bind than just letting the war continue somehow, some way. So I would say that the chances of them voting to end the war and actually conduct a withdrawal would be highly unlikely. We're most likely going to see that they either don't act or they vote to continue it.
Yeah, well, what's wild is the amount of complaining, and it's not limited to one political side. Like, I know people in their heads are going to be thinking, oh, well, you know, it's the Democrats. They're saying that the president's not being transparent. That's just par for the course when it comes to politics. The other side's going to say that the other side's not doing what they want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all of them saying that. Like, it's not just one side. That all the senators are pretty much in agreement. They're saying that they want more information, and it sounds like they're having a hard time getting it. And today we saw that the Secretary of War was in Congress testifying, testifying, and that's the first time, to my knowledge, that he's testified about this war so far. So, I mean, that was the first time they had a chance to directly question what the strategy was, and he was on the hot seat all day long today. And also, the General Kane was also on the hot seat as well. He was being a little bit more well-behaved about the whole situation, but the Secretary of War was also getting into some spats with people left and right, and also getting caught in some questionable statements too, to say the least. So, you know, I think what the problem is right now is there needs to be more communication between the executive, and they need to, like, you know, of course, keep Congress and keep the Senate informed about what they're doing, what they're planning on doing, because the executive is not an independent branch. Like, it can't just do whatever the hell it wants over there and not keep the others informed. They have to keep Congress informed, and right now it sounds like they're not doing that to a proper degree.
Well, of course, Matthew, the Congress can't be informed because they're plebeians like you and me, Matthew, just average peasants and nobodies. Only the executive branch needs to know everything that's going on and make all the decisions for this country, as that is truly a democratic and checked and balanced sort of a government, much like the one that we founded here in this country 250 years ago. But outside of that sarcastic comment, I would have to say that, you know, you never know, but I would also have to add on that there was a congressional hearing that was conducted today with the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I got to be honest with y'all, it didn't really go that well. I mean, from the questions that were being asked and really the lack of answers, or more so the goofy answers that were being given, it didn't really look that good. Like, for example, when there was a question brought up about why in the world did we go to war with Iran this time around anyways, the Secretary of Defense stated that we went to war with them because they posed an imminent threat due to their nuclear weaponry. So then it was asked by a representative, does that mean that Operation Midnight Hammer was not successful? The Secretary of Defense then responded that the Operation Midnight Hammer had been a complete success and all of their nuclear facilities had been destroyed and their nuclear programs had been buried under the earth. So then the representative asked, well, if you're saying that, then why in the world did we go to war with them again? Because clearly you're saying that the nuclear threat was destroyed last year, but your justification in going into the war again this year was because the nuclear threat was an imminent one to the United States. So what's the answer? And there really wasn't a good answer that was given to that. A lot like we've been asking here on the channel, because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, to be frank with y'all, there was a million reasons that we could justify this conflict right now that's not even on the nuclear issue, and then we could deal with the nuclear issue as a bylaw of whatever agreement we make with them off of the main one. We could have gone with crimes against humanity, the sponsoring of terrorist forces. We could have gone with the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. We could have gone with a myriad of different sorts of war goals to start this war with Iran and have a different justification for it, and then keep the original claims that were made last year that Midnight Hammer truly did destroy their nuclear facilities alive and well in public discourse by not challenging them by starting a second war with the same claim.
Yeah, I think that's largely, you know, the Senate, like I mentioned, is complaining about not getting a whole bunch of information from the executive. That might be why they're not getting it, because like we've been saying for some time, we've gotten a lot of flack for it. People have accused us of being political. They've accused us of trying to push forward some type of partisan agenda. That's not our objective whatsoever. We're simply calling it how we see it and how a lot of people see it. It appears to be there's not really a coherent strategy, and there's still not a coherent strategy. It seems to be flying by the seat of their pants to a large degree, and the president's just doing it based on his what he's feeling in his bones, as he said at one point. So that might be why they're not getting a whole bunch of information to Congress and the Senate, is because of that. So I mean, that's a little bit disturbing. That's why there's a reporting requirement. That's why there's an expectation that they're going to give information to the legislature, because it's to prevent stuff like that. It's to prevent, you know, a lack of a plan, and it's to make sure that they're doing what's best for the country. So, I mean, they should be raising more hell about that in the Senate. If they're not getting that information like they're claiming they aren't, they should be raising hell about it and demanding it.
I would certainly agree so. I would say that definitely needs to be done. I also saw someone in the chat bring up a point. They said, what I heard you say about me talking about justifiable war goals is we could have gone with this BS, that BS, that BS, or any versus we wanted to make as an excuse. Well, that's not really how it works, because to put it in a different way, would you say that the United States entering the Second World War to defeat the Nazi Germans and in the concentration camps is just a BS justification for a war against the Germans? I personally would say not, but off of that statement that you just made right there, it's making it sound like every war goal that we could have had as a justifiable one that truly was just isn't just, and it's just made up. I'm sure many people remember this, or maybe they don't, because a lot of people's public memory these days is very short and fleeting, but we watched here on this channel 40,000 Iranians get gunned down brutally in the streets, executed in their houses, and dragged down in the streets and shot execution style by the IRGC, the Besieged, and other internal forces in Iran, because they had the goal to get out and protest against their government. I don't know if everyone forgot about that, but that was the worst massacre that we've ever seen. People have been giving the communist Chinese crap for 40 years because of the Tiananmen Square massacre, and that was a quarter of the size in the amount of people that died, even at the most liberal estimates of that massacre, that died in Iran in early January. If anything, the war could have been justified on that alone as a war against Iran for crimes against humanity, to hold the Iranian leadership accountable and to see that such government, that tyrannical, oppressive, and criminal government, was brought to its knees and replaced with one that would respect the Iranian people. Or better yet, we could go with the fact that they are developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they will never agree to not stop development on those, which poses an inherent threat to people like you in the chat who are making comments that that's a BS war goal. Would you like to die by an Iranian ICBM because you said it was BS until they got one and fired it at you? I certainly wouldn't. I know you wouldn't either. I know you're smarter than that. Nobody would. All of these war goals that we had against Iran were entirely justifiable, and we went with one that we had already claimed that we had defeated in Midnight Hammer, which is the nuclear one, which we could have dealt with anyways, but not made it our primary war goal. We could have gone with any other one and kept that claim intact in the past, and then, just lightly brushed over it and corrected it in the present day, now knowing that we didn't really do anything to the nuclear program at all. But outside of that, we do have a whole lot more news to cover, even within the Middle East. We actually have a few more things to cover inside of Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Israel before we move on over into East Asia and then on into Europe for the war in Ukraine and all of the developments that came out there today. But before we move on from that, I do want to make sure to thank everyone for watching so far tonight. We have had a peak viewership tonight of 17.1 thousand people, and 62,000 people have watched this channel within the first hour. And I've got to thank you all greatly for enjoying this channel and watching it this entire time. It's an incredible and wonderful thing to know that so many people continue to join us here every single night for the news, and I hope that so far our analysis and our news coverage and facts about what's happened today have been about as accurate and well researched as they can be so far. But before we move on into the rest of all of the statements and news that we have for the night, we do have a couple of questions that I'd like to get to. We're going to get to 3 of them here really quickly before we move on in the rest of the news to be able to get to talk to a couple of y'all. And so Matthew, what do we got?
All right. Also, by the way, we do have a little breaking news right now about Iran, and it's actually about future military action against Iran. So it sounds like it could be escalating here, possibly. But I've just seen here a story. It's being reported that commanders are apparently going to be briefing the president on new Iran military options on Thursday, which is tomorrow morning. So it sounds like they are moving forward with the planning. It sounds like they've come up with plans and they're going to be making the briefing tomorrow. So we don't know when the decision is going to be made. Like it seems like in the past, generally speaking, they present the president with the options, and it usually takes at least a few days to come to a decision. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what that decision is going to be, but it sounds like they are presenting those options tomorrow morning. So at least we have more of a time frame at this point. But moving into our first super chat, though, this one is going to go to none other than Right Geek Project. And thank you very much, Right Geek, for that support right there. And a very generous, by the way, a 100 smackaroo. And it's thanks to that support from folks like Right Geek Project that keeps our channel in motion, as they call it, like that boy Isaac Newton used to say back in the day. But they said, I didn't know where I was going with that, so I just figured I'd make the reference anyway. But Right Geek Project said, hello, Enforcer Matt. Thank you for your outstanding coverage and analysis. And with Russian oil lighting up and Strait of Hormuz situation, should we prepare for a global energy crisis? And how do you think the EU and US will react if Russia uses tactical nukes against Ukraine?
And I gotta thank you for the unbelievably massive support and help this channel to keep it running. Right Geek Project. And to answer your question, and also thank you for the kind words, but to answer your questions there, I would say that we certainly should be preparing for a global energy crisis. As a matter of fact, I would find it to be an imperative at this point for fuel rationing to begin in the United States of America, considering that no matter what, the situation will not be fixed or addressed, even in the best case scenario at this point, before we start to run out of any fuel to be able to run the country with. So I would say that that should be something that should be done by the government domestically in the United States to already prepare us for the crisis that is to come, that is now unavoidable. I would also say that that would be a prudent and wise action for many other countries around the world to do as well. And while that would largely blow the lid off of the idea for some people in the public that the situation is fine and everything's going good and nothing's wrong, generally, that sort of optic doesn't really matter if a couple of months from now we're completely out of oil and the whole economy comes to a grinding halt and modern life basically collapses due to a lack of transportation. That would be a far worse outcome. So I would say that's certainly something that needs to be done to prepare for the global energy crisis. And as far as everyone else can do here in the United States, a smart idea, especially if you live in any West or really around the world right now, months from now, we're going to make sure to drive as little as possible to be able to try and conserve the fuel resources. That is about all that really can be done by us, because that's one of the hugest, or more so the largest type of fuel consumption in the United States is for domestic transportation and travel. So cutting down on that would significantly stretch fuel resources in the United States for about as long as we could possibly see. Also, as far as using tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine, I'm not really sure how the U.S. react. They might even state that that was justified. I'm not really sure. But we also, I would also say the Europeans would probably react pretty strongly. I don't know how that would look, but I would assume that they would probably react a lot more strongly than the U.S. would. So I thank you incredibly for that massive support, Right Geek Project, and I hope that does answer that question incredibly well. And before we move on into the rest of our questions that we have here in this brief segment, we actually have some breaking news coming out at this moment right now. So Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so it's along the same vein of the story that I just reported on a second ago in the breaking news segment. So I've learned some more details literally that quick. So we got some details here. Apparently, the briefing that the president is set to receive tomorrow morning from CENTCOM is once again about potential military action against Iran. But here's the catch. We got an idea of what they're going to be briefing. Apparently, the options include three different things. A new wave of massive strikes on Iran that we already reported on at the very beginning of this stream. But here's another big one. They're also briefing him on operations in the Strait of Hormuz, possible ground operations that we're hearing about right now. And also, they will be briefing on a third option, which is going in and securing the nuclear material once again. So that's a pretty big story. So they're not, we had heard before that maybe they were ruling out the ground operation side of things, but it sounds like they're not. It sounds like part of the briefing tomorrow is about potential ground operations. So it sounds like it's still on the table. That's a pretty big piece of information and detail right there. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that is a pretty big piece of information. It's showing us that maybe they're considering a resumption of military actions against Iran, which at this point would probably be a wise decision. But then again, we'll also have to see how that vote goes in the Congress here this Friday, and hopefully we see that they vote to continue the conflict, because at this point, to be entirely honest with y'all, that's really our only hope in hell of coming out of this thing intact, is continuing the war and seeing that we can somehow make some sort of a successful exit from the conflict, considering the current situation that we're in right now. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least as far as the breaking news is concerned. And a huge thanks to you once again, Right Geek Project, for that incredible support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the second question of this segment.
All right, so our second super chat here is going to go to none other than Atomic Tsunami, which sounds quite horrifying, actually, if you really think about it. But thank you very much for that $66 support, and we do appreciate it very much. And Atomic Tsunami said, thank you guys for all you do. And like me, my dad was a huge fan of the show. Unfortunately, he passed away a few months ago. And also my condolences to you, by the way. I'm very sorry to hear that. He said his name was Forrest. He was 66 years old, and his donation is in honor of him.
Well, I thank you so much for honoring them, and I thank you so much for the support and help the channel to keep on running, and I hate to hear about that. My condolences to you, Atomic Tsunami, and it's always unfortunate to hear about people passing away, especially those who watch the show, because we always try and make it a very close-knit sort of a community here, even with it being in the hundreds of thousands of these days. And I've got to say that that's very unfortunate to hear. But I'm happy to know that you're still here and watching, and we thank you so much for sharing his name with us, Forrest. I do have to say my condolences to you once again. That's always unfortunate to deal with the passing of a family member, and I hope that while the wound will always be there from the loss of a loved one, you'll always have good memories to remember him by, and that's kind of the bittersweet thing about always missing the folks who pass away, is that you miss them because at least you have something to miss them for. And I suppose that's a good thing and a bad thing in a way, because it hurts to see him go, but it was a great thing to have them around when they were there. But a huge thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep it running, Atomic Tsunami, and I hope that does address that the best I can. And once again, my condolences to you. That's very sad to hear. But But with that, we are on to the last bit of, the last question that we have of this segment. But before we get to that, we actually have more news coming out of this moment right now. So, Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so here's another piece of information. I'm getting pieces of this story right here as I'm going along. So it's about the same thing. It's about the briefing tomorrow morning that the president's going to be getting. Apparently, the individual that's going to be briefing the president is the same individual that briefed the president right before the war started back in late February of this year, earlier this year, that is. The exact same guy is briefing him on these options. And then obviously, as you know, after that briefing happened the last time, this fellow from CENTCOM gave it, the war started literally a couple of days later. So that's a pretty big piece of information as well. Also, it looks like the president has posted a graphic here showing the Strait of Hormuz, and he's calling it the Strait of Trump. So, you know, I think that might be like his version of messaging, possibly that indicating that something might be coming soon. The Strait of Hormuz, of course, it appears to be in AI style, but you know that all that stuff aside, by the way, it appears to be he's messaging about the Strait of Hormuz right here. So that's a pretty big one as well. Enforcer, what's your take on that?
We'll have to see what happens. I'd hope that they take some military actions against the Hormuz, because it's, you know, only been about almost 2 months late at this point. You know, we could have done this from day one and avoided the situation, but we'll have to see. Hopefully we'll see that something positive is finally done at this point.
Show him the graphic, my boy.
Oh God, I have very low tolerances for this kind of stuff. Oh,
show them the graphic. Look at that. Look at this. Feast your eyes, people. This isn't quite as tasty as a Costco chicken, and a Costco chicken has no seasoning. But this right here is what you call a graphic. Look at that. It comes from an account, says women for Trump. Oh boy. That's, you know, this looks like a pirate map, actually. This looks like something that the Houthis would make if they're trying to find the booty.
I'm not going to lie, man. I'm going to be kind of honest. This looks a lot like a thumbnail from a certain YouTube channel. Like, you know the one I'm talking about, right? Like, can you rake your brain to think of the one? You know, it's a certain... Yeah, like, it looks a lot like it. And also, I'm pretty sure, Matthew, that the current president is the guy who was also kind of big behind renaming the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Gulf. I'm noticing a little typo right there. It's still called the Persian Gulf on this little graphic here.
That's probably too advanced for the AI to come up with all that.
Yeah, probably. But, you know, I mean, hey, folks, nothing like slapping some guy's name on every damn thing on the world. Yeah. Like, next thing you know, this shit's going to be like Aladdin. You've got your HIV Aladdin. It's going to be like that. Like, everything's like...
Yeah. I tell you, it's not wise from a political perspective to put your name on stuff that's having major crises. That's not wise. Like, you don't want to put your name next to stuff that's going to have like a page in the history book about how bad it was for the global economy. Like, you want to keep your name far away from stuff like that. But
so, I mean, we done went over basically past 24 hours of news. So, if y'all like the show today, please drop a subscription. Drop a follow, depending on what platform you're on. We're on Twitch, Kick, Rumble, and YouTube. I'm sorry. Drop in anytime. If y'all watching this later on, please feel free to drop a like and drop a follow.